Hey everybody, this is Chris Woodward. I'm executive editor for Sport Fishing. I'm with fellow editor Jim Hendricks, and today we're sitting down with the folks from Yamaha to talk about outboards for inshore fishing boats. We have with us today Captain Rick Murphy, who is a Yamaha pro. He's been a fishing guide since 1982, and he is currently host of Sportsman's Adventures and Florida and Texas Insider Fishing Report TV shows. Welcome to Fishing Roundtable, Rick.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. Good to see you, Jim.
Thank you. So, Rick, I'm curious, what was your very first experience with Yamaha? Can you tell us about that?
So, Chris, back, as you said in the intro, I started guiding in the early 80s, and my first encounter realistically with Yamaha was in 1986. Even back then, weight was starting to become a factor in what we could do and how shallow we could access the flats. And my stepbrother had a 1986 Hughes Bonefisher, 16-foot Bonefisher, and the motor of choice was a two-stroke 90 horsepower Yamaha. And then I started with Yamaha shortly after that in 1993. Signing a deal with them and been with them ever since with Bob Berdanier at the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show. So that's kind of a big deal for us.
Absolutely. So you've run Yamaha now for how many years does that make it?
Well, let's see.
27, 28?
Yeah, at least.
Okay, you've seen quite a bit of difference between almost 3 decades ago and today. So tell me right now, in terms of your inshore fishing boats, because I know you do offshore and inshore, but what boat and outboards did you choose for your current inshore package and why?
So the inshore package that we have is we have a 17 HPXS with a 4-stroke 70. And that boat 2 years ago, that boat came out by Maverick probably 5 years ago, and then they came up with a carbon option. And we were actually able to have the first carbon 17S with a 70. And boy, what a difference it made. The boat simply went a lot faster, floated even shallower. And it didn't really take a lot of weight out of the boat. I think we took about 120 pounds out of the boat total. But when you're only talking about something that's really light to begin with, it made a huge difference. It stiffened up the ride and then it really allowed the 70 to really shine.
Rick, let me ask you, you started with two-stroke 90, which was the motor of choice at that time when you first started. How was the transition from the two-stroke to the 4 strokes as you made that changeover?
Well, certainly in the early days of the 4-stroke technology, everybody was trying to get an understanding of how they were all going to work. And when you came from the 2-stroke world, you were accustomed to, when you propped the boat, whether it was a big outboard, even a small outboard, you always were accustomed to not having that outboard turn in the 2-stroke world more than 5,600 RPMs. If you were turning 5,800, you were over revving. It wasn't good for the longevity of the motor. And then more importantly, it wasn't good economically. It just wasn't good for your fuel mileage. So when we started with 4 strokes, that was the big thing. We didn't understand, I believe, and I'm saying the industry, not necessarily Yamaha, but the consumers didn't understand that it was really, really important that you need to rev the motors up. We got to, the current day SHO, we run that motor at 6,150. So we want to have it around 6,000 RPMs. The rev limiter on this F70 that we're talking about goes off at 6,350. So once we started to understand that we're allowed to turn more RPMs, then the transition and the performance of the 4 strokes really started to shine. It was really impressive.
So what do you like most about the F70, today's F70?
Well, certainly what I love about it is how light it is. You know, it's a real light motor. It allows that Maverick to float in very, very shallow water.
How
Uh,
shallow are we talking?
well, we're talking about in soft bottom in the HPX, like we get down in Everglades National Park, 5 inches. And 5 inches is shallower than the redfish typically want to be, the snook want to be. You find plenty of catfish and all the undesirables up there. But it's really funny when you look back and you start to see that you're dragging. It's a pretty good thing to understand, oh, maybe I need to move just a little deeper. We're going to get a little more into that as we get further into the questions. I'm going to explain some things and the reason why that's so important to understand that.
Okay. How's your boat rigged specifically for ultra shallow water angling? Like propped, how'd you prop it? What are the batteries like? How many? Where'd you place them? How do you balance the weight? Can you explain some of that?
That's a really good question, Chris. You know, first off, one of the most important things that can kill a technical poling skiff is to not have the center of gravity in a running situation as well as in a poling situation. Let me elaborate that on a little further. First off, we put the starting battery for the F70 Yamaha in the console. We want it in the center of the boat. Now, when we decide to fish with a trolling motor, or we decide to fish with a trolling, in addition to a trolling motor battery, the trolling motor battery now would go in the bow, but it's also right over the center of the keel. We don't want to have the boat sitting to the left or sitting to the right. So we're really focused on if we put a cooler in front of the console, everything is centered in the boat. So you don't have one side of the boat leaning in a running situation so that we can remain dry, or we don't have to tab the boat so that we can offset too much weight on one side or the other. You know, these little skiffs are very, very weight sensitive. So it's really important to make sure that when you start planning on building one, or when you start planning on going fishing after you've received that boat, that everything is displaced in the right areas. You know, if you put a tackle bag on one side and you got your wife and she's got her little bag of towels and sunscreen and all the little things, it's got to go in the other well, you know, the other storage compartment. Or we try to make sure that we put as much stuff in the forward compartment, because certainly the draft of the boat changes when I get on the back tower. So all of those things are very important. But if you really look at somebody who understands the dynamics of poling that boat in shallow water, they're going to recognize that they're going to have that boat very balanced. And I've been known to even carry, back in the days when I was fishing tarpon tournaments, I would carry sandbags in the back of the boat. But then when we would start fishing, because we burned off a bunch of fuel and I wanted to keep the boat quiet, I would put sandbags up in the bow of the boat, because the sandbags would conform to the V in front of the gas tank. So ballast is really important in understanding where you put all the things that people bring, where they go as well is important too.
Indeed. So give us some examples of how you fish this ultralight skiff.
So, you know, part of that question you just asked me was, you know, how do we, what props? Here's a good example.
Oh, true.
If
Yeah.
we're fishing in shallow water, we're not making long runs, but we're in ultra shallow water. And it may be a time where we've got to get up and run out of a place because the tide is falling. We utilize a pothole not to do any damage to any seagrass. We use a 4-blade prop because of the Maverick with the Yamaha 70 on the back and an Atlas jack plate. We want to run the jack plate all the way up, and the Yamaha 4-bladed props that we're using work very well to allow us to run extremely high, as well as to be able to jump out of a shallow spot in a very short distance. However, in a 4-blade application, you're not going to go as fast, and and you're not going to go as far. You're not going to get as much as good a gas mileage. So if we're bone fishing and we're running across the bay, or fishing down in the Keys, or we're going to be tarpon fishing on the West Coast, putting in the Keys and running 50 miles to one way, then we'll put a 3-blade prop. And the Yamaha K series prop, been around for a long time. The black stainless steel prop, still use it. I use a 17 pitch prop. The reason why I like it so much is the Maverick has a tendency, because it's so long, it might have a tendency to porpoise a little. And by lifting the stern, which the K series prop is a stern lift prop, and then I don't have to put as much trim tab in order to get that smooth ride. And it keeps my speed up, you know.
So you've really dialed it in terms of all the parts and all the pieces here. Just tell us a little bit more about where you fish and why this lightweight outboard is such a big help to you.
Well, so I fish all throughout the Keys. I still guide 2 to 3 days a week. I fish still professional redfish tournaments. I also guide over on the west coast or southwest coast of Florida. So we're, from Chuckaluskee all the way down to Flamingo and then back around to the Florida Keys. And, when you're fishing at the end of the year and you start adding up the expenses, what I have found with the 70 is that it certainly just helps me a tremendous amount because of my fuel savings. It's a very economical motor. I can do, still do 36 to 38 miles an hour, depending on the load. Sometimes we even get to 40. Most days we're around 36 to 37 miles an hour. And that boat really works well for all the things I need to do. I can go back up in little shallow. I can pull in real shallow flats for redfish and snook out front of Flamingo. But the next day I could be fishing with a young child that wants to throw a popping cork in 3 feet of water, catching a sea trout. So it has a lot of versatility, and I like that about that boat, as well as the 70.
Okay. What would you say is the number one reason you decided to go with Yamaha, and why you've stuck with Yamaha for 30 years?
Well, undoubtedly, reliability is everything. And I've got a boat over in the Bahamas. I have a house over in the Berry Islands, Chub Key. And we use that boat essentially, our time to go there as a family, or to take friends, or even sometimes business associates there. To have a motor that's going to sit most of the time for 6 to 7 months, I got to be, I have to be able to rely on it. And I've never, in all the years, I took that place over from my grandfather in 1999. And the key is, when I put it up, I just pull the fuel line and let it run out of gas and push it. It's an old 2-stroke. And I push the choke button to run all the fuel out of the carburetors. And I've never had to take a mechanic over there to do a carburetor job. That to me says a lot. Now, my biggest concern is, are my batteries going to be charged? And sometimes I either take a new battery with me, or a caretaker will make sure the battery is charged, because I disconnect it when I leave. Another boat that I have in our arsenal is there's a lot of pole or no motor zones anymore. And they're designed for kayaking, canoeing, but we have a G3 John boat with a 25 Yamaha. And in order to be in compliance with the law, you have to be able to remove that engine from the transom and lay that engine in the bottom of that 16-foot John boat. It's a 1642. So it's 42 bottom and 16 feet long. Once I remove that engine, now I can go back in there just like a canoe or a kayak or whatever. The fishing's outstanding, but we only essentially use that boat maybe December and January and February. So to have a motor that just sits for 9 months out of the year, and to be able to, it's a tiller, to go pull start it, pump up the gas bulb, I've never failed me. Yeah. So that alone is the reason why I've been with Yamaha all these years. I stick with Yamaha, and it's, a huge part of what we're doing. I want to back up to one thing that I forgot to mention. You know, when we're talking about these shallow water boats, Chris, and we're talking about how we rig them, a boat creates a pressure wave. And I want you to think of it, if you're in 12 inches of water and your boat drafts 5 inches like the HPX does with the Yamaha 70, I'm suppressing or I'm compressing essentially 7 inches before I hit the bottom. Now, if we were to have a much heavier boat, let's go back in the old days, the 18 Redfisher with a 2-stroke 115 that drew 12 inches of water. Now, I'm dragging on the bottom, but I'm also creating a pressure wave. That pressure wave is what the lateral lines of a redfish and a snook and a trout, when they're up shallow, tarpon, those are the things they feel, a bonefish, a permit. So the lighter boats now have allowed us to get a lot closer. And because of fishing pressure in general all over the United States, what I'm finding with these much lighter boats and much lighter engine packages is that we're not creating as much of a wave because we're not compressing as much water, and it's allowing us to get closer to the fish, which puts me in an advantage of being able to catch them.
Didn't know you were a scientist, Rick.
Oh, I don't know about a scientist, but very, very observant. And, you know, when you stop the boat with the push pole or with a power pole, you see that wave go over into the fish. And if you don't catch that fish before he feels that wave, then his attitude is dramatically different. So weight is everything when you're up there skinny, you know?
Absolutely. Good observations.
Right.
Let's talk about some of Yamaha's other skiff outboards, because you know, there are obviously plenty of folks out there who are not fishing, you know, necessarily the ultralight skiffs. Yamaha makes 75 through 115 horsepower outboards. Mm-hmm. What are some of the standout features of those mid-range, mid-size outboards?
Well, weight is weight. And that's the one thing that we all have to realize, is that if you're fishing in a 16-foot skiff and let's say just the three of us decide to go fishing. So I'm going to say you weigh 115 pounds. And I'm going to say that Jim weighs 190 pounds and I weigh 170. So let's say that together we all weigh 500. And then we end up putting another 200 pounds of ice and food and tackle and raincoats and all that stuff. So what we got to remember is that same amount of weight is going to dramatically affect a 16-foot boat with a 70 horsepower Yamaha versus an 18-foot boat is longer. So it has the ability to displace that same amount of weight. And then let's fast forward. We're going to have the three of us the next day. We're going to go in my 23-foot Pathfinder, which has an SHO 250. So what ends up happening is, it doesn't matter whether it's still the same 600 or 500 pounds of weight, whether it goes into a little 17-foot skiff or it goes into an 18-foot skiff or it goes into a 250. Now, here's why this is really important. From the 70 to the 115, or the 75 to the 115, as the boats have become lighter because of being built out of these new carbon materials, and the motors have become lighter, what we have now is options as a consumer. What used to be the norm, a 17-foot boat with a 115 with an option of a 90 to go a little shallower. Now what I'm finding is that guy may be taking the 90 to go the same speed as he was doing with the 115. And now he has a lighter motor, or maybe he's that 90 guy who doesn't really care about how fast he's going. And now he's putting a 70 on there because, again, it's less weight for him to pull for 8 hours. And it's also less weight for him to have to, push around, as well as it's going to allow him to achieve the same speed as he was before the lighter weight boats. So that's the key, is that now the consumer, which I'm excited for those guys, have options, because everybody's budget isn't always, top shelf. He maybe not be able to afford a 115, and his budget is for a 70, and now he has the ability, to change.
Right.
And that's really important, I think.
So it's not, especially in inshore fishing, it's not as important to key in on, the most horsepower you can get on the transom, which has kind of been the way people have thought about powering their boats in the past. But certainly in this application, that's a different perspective, right?
Yeah, not everybody wants to be racing Rick Murphy. You know what I mean? I probably would have a lot more longevity out of my elbows and my shoulders if I had lighter boats over the years. But I always wanted to be the first one there. In one of the tournaments, the Gold Cup that I won, it was crazy. And going that fast to get there so that you could be there 45 minutes before the next guy was all part of it, and that's kind of the reason why I said, man, I got to get out of this, because, 81, I don't have anything else to prove. I won all of those things. And more importantly, you get older, and it's certainly important to be able to protect all those resources. But to think that you're running and you're building boats to fish in tournaments so that you can be there 45 minutes before the next guy could potentially see you and lose that spot. Kill you,
Well, we've also seen a trend where a lot of inshore anglers, especially people who don't live in zones where the water gets super skinny, really, going to the bay boats. And you mentioned your Pathfinder 23 and your SHO 250. A lot of these folks are running anything from an F150 up to an F300 at this point, because for one thing, because they can, and for another thing, they're maybe more interested in navigating larger water bodies and not getting quite as skinny. Can you talk a little bit about the F150 to F300 range of outboards that Yamaha offers, and what some of the advantages are for those?
So the cool part about what happens with the bigger stuff from the 150s on up into the 300s is, again, because of the light boats and lightweight motors, now we have this ability now to put a 150 on an 18-foot boat, but then we have the ability now with a 22-foot Pathfinder or a 20-foot Pathfinder to put a 175, and then the inline 200 for the economy on the same 22, and then you have the option on a 23 Pathfinder to put a 250 SHO Yamaha, or even the 300. And as we move on up, so as consumers' needs change, Yamaha has been right there along with them, and also having relationships with all their boat builders to be able to have an understanding of what they need allows them to also help them build a better product so that it makes it more sales appeal. The one thing that I love about the SHOs is the super high output that they have. Certainly in the 4.2 liters, we have the lower unit with the shallow water pickup. I hate to say the racing lower unit, that's not the right description, but because it's more bullet shaped, it allows us to run with the motor jacked up on the jack plate way up out of the water with a 4-blade Fusion propeller, which is one of Yamaha's turbo props. It allows us also to have all that great the electronics. You get this hydraulic steering assist. You can steer these boats now with one finger, and it's just an add-on. I'm not talking about the new electronic steering that Yamaha's just introduced, but for 10 years, we've been running the electronic power steering assist in the Pathfinders. And you can literally, through these windy creeks, you're always on the flats whenever you're in the backcountry, whether you're in a bay boat or a skiff, it's never a straight line. You got to go through this, around this channel to go through this little staked out channel, you know, and so steering is a huge part of that. And having the ability to, you know, manipulate all of those cool products, the 150 right on up to the 300 in the building stage, just makes your overall experience out on the water that much more pleasurable.
Well, and you kind of touched on something there with the steering, with digital throttle and shift and Helmmaster EX now going all the way down to F-150s. How is that going to change the inshore fishing world as you'd see it?
It's going to change it in a big way. And let me explain to you. I'll give you one example of my life. Okay. So when I come home from an 8-hour day of fishing and I'm idling down the Buttonwood Canal in Everglades National Park headed to the boat ramp, one of the things that I'm doing is I'm organizing the boat to put it on the trailer. And many times I have to say to my customer, can you just steer me down the middle of the canal? Because I'm putting away rods in rod lockers. I'm putting them away under rod holders. I'm making sure I'm latching coolers. I'm getting their wallet and their keys out of a compartment that we stored it in before the day, and their phone before the day started. The cool part is now, one, I'm going to be able to push a button because I've recorded that track the day before and the day before and the day before and the day before that. And it just follows that for me. But then when I get to the dock, if there's not a spot for me to pull up, I can push the stay point and stay in one place. And now I can finish getting everything ready. But let's take it to the next step. What about the guy who builds a 25-foot Pathfinder with an F300 or a 26 with an F300, and now on nice days, he's going offshore? And what he's going to be able to do now is he can use the stay point and anchor over the top of a wreck, or he can use drift point as he's drifting side two, so that he can spread out, have an angler in the bow, an angler sitting on the seat at the console, an angler sitting behind the console seat, and then a fourth one, so that his four baits and his presentation is a whole lot more broad than just dragging two. Or maybe he wants to do a little trolling. He can push the button, head a certain heading, and now the boat's doing it. And now he's back there doing the fishing while the boat is kind of operating under his supervision. That we've never had before in a single engine application, and we've never had those options as a single engine boat operator. And to me, I'm very, very excited about this.
Yeah, I love the whole idea of if you're going to get in the bow and throw a cast net on your bay boat, and you want to just, you want to get it to the position you want it in, instead of having to turn around and shout back to whoever's manning the helm, oh, go this way, oh, put it in gear, oh, knock it into neutral. You have the ability to come to the spot, stay point it, and then you can walk to the bow and throw your cast net, and hopefully you don't have to jockey around too much. But it always does take a little fine tuning, but at the same time, it's a good tool to use in so many different applications, even coming up next to a buoy or what have you, and trying to scout that out and wanting to stay in the same spot even though the current is cranking right past it. You've got so many opportunities to use the functions of Helmmaster EX. It's for fishing in particular.
This time of year is a great example. All these passes on the West Coast and on the Atlantic have tons of crabs flushing out. And you can't hardly find a crab at a bait and tackle store because everybody's using crabs, permits and tarpons and whatnot. So a lot of times you're forced to catch your own, and to be able to push stay point, sit in the pass in a certain spot. And as the crabs are being flushed out, you're just sitting there dipping. I've never been able to do that before, but I'm going to be doing it soon. Yeah, that's the cool part.
Jim, do you have any other questions for Rick?
I really don't. I've learned a lot here, Rick. Thanks so much for sharing your experiences and your years of knowledge and insight regarding shallow water fishing and the outboards that allow us to do it.
Well, it's
Well,
my honor to be able to do it with you guys and for you guys. So thank you.
great. Well, we appreciate you joining us today on Fishing Roundtable.
My pleasure.